Why is it called laurel? And even more importantly, how long have human beings known this plant? Today, when we see a laurel leaf in the kitchen, we rarely think that we are looking at one of the most symbolic plants of the entire ancient world. A plant that was sacred to Apollo for the Greeks. A plant associated with prophecy. A plant used to crown winners, poets, and men considered worthy of glory. And a plant so closely connected with wisdom that even today, when we say that someone has graduated, we are unknowingly using a word that comes from its ancient name, laurel. But the story of the laurel begins much earlier than Apollo, much earlier than Rome, and even much earlier than the classical civilizations. One of the most surprising archaeological records of this plant dates back about 7,300 years. To find it, we have to travel to Spain, to the shores of an ancient lake, where the earliest archaeologically documented laurel was discovered. The site is called La Draga, near the modern lake of Banyoles in Catalonia. La Draga was an early Neolithic settlement occupied between roughly 7,300 and 7,000 years ago. Normally, when we think about an archaeological site this ancient, we imagine pottery, stone tools, and bones. Leaves, however, are among the most difficult archaeological remains to preserve, yet La Draga is an exceptional place. Part of the settlement was located in a constantly wet environment with very little oxygen. These conditions allowed organic materials to survive, materials that would normally have disappeared completely. During the excavations, researchers recovered perfectly recognizable leaves. Among them were leaves of Laurus nobilis, our familiar laurel. We are therefore looking at a plant that was already present in the Mediterranean and pre-Mediterranean landscape inhabited by humans thousands of years before the great classical civilizations were born. But one important detail needs to be understood. These leaves do not allow us to say with certainty that the people of La Draga used laurel as a spice, a medicine, or a ritual plant. Their distribution instead suggests that laurel was part of the surrounding vegetation, probably growing in the riverside forests near the settlement. And this is exactly what makes archaeobotany so fascinating. Sometimes an apparently insignificant leaf can tell us that a landscape that no longer exists today was once completely different. From this point onward, the story of the laurel becomes even more fascinating. But why is it called laurel? The Italian word alloro comes from the Latin laurus, through a linguistic evolution in which the article also became fused with the original name. That is why we still have two apparently different but closely related words today: alloro and lauro. The Latin laurus also gave rise to the adjective laureus, meaning of laurel. From this comes a word we still use today, laurea. To understand why, however, we have to enter the world of ancient Greece. For the ancient Greeks, laurel was not simply an aromatic tree. Laurel was a sacred plant, the tree of Apollo. In Greek mythology, laurel is closely connected with Apollo. The most famous story is the story of Daphne. Apollo falls in love with the nymph Daphne, but she does not return his love and tries to escape. When Daphne can no longer escape the god, she asks for help and is transformed into a tree. That tree is the laurel. Rather than abandoning her, Apollo consecrates the plant to himself. From that moment onward, laurel becomes one of his symbols. The legend also explains one of the most important characteristics of the laurel in the eyes of the ancients. The plant remains green even during winter, a plant that seems never to die. An evergreen plant. Such a plant was perfect for representing something human beings have always desired: glory that survives death. The connection with Apollo was not only mythological. Apollo was also the god of prophecy. At Delphi, in the sanctuary of Apollo, laurel was deeply connected with divination. According to tradition, the Pythia was associated with the use of laurel leaves before prophecy, while the laurel itself played an important role in the rituals of the sanctuary. Laurel thus became a plant standing on the boundary between the human world and the divine, between knowledge and mystery, between victory and prophecy. But another association became even more famous: the laurel wreath. In ancient Greece, laurel was especially connected with the Pythian Games, held at Delphi in honor of Apollo. The winners received a vegetal crown as a symbol of their success. From there, laurel gradually became a universal image of victory, honor, and glory. Think about how remarkable that is. A simple crown made of leaves could represent something so important. The crown was not made of gold. The crown was not made of silver. The crown was not made of precious metal. The crown was made of a living plant. And precisely because of that, it carried a special meaning. Glory was represented through something alive. Rome would inherit and transform this symbolism. Laurel would become part of the representation of victorious commanders, public celebrations, and works of art. The plant would become increasingly connected with the idea of triumph. Even today, expressions such as conquering the laurel of victory, or resting on one's laurels, preserve an image that was born thousands of years ago. Pliny devotes an entire section to laurel and describes numerous uses of its leaves, bark, and berries. According to ancient medicine, different parts of the plant were used in preparations intended for a wide variety of conditions, from coughs and inflammations to preparations applied externally. Naturally, these accounts must be understood in the context of their own time. The medicinal practices described by Pliny belong to ancient medicine and should not be confused with modern medical treatment, but they tell us something important. Laurel was known and valued in a much deeper way than we might imagine when looking at the simple leaf we use in the kitchen today. There is also another fascinating detail that in ancient culture, laurel was not associated only with glory. The plant was also believed to offer protection. Its evergreen nature, its intense fragrance, and its association with Apollo helped create an almost apotropaic image around the plant as something capable of keeping evil and negative influences away. This idea of protection fitted perfectly with its natural characteristics. Laurel is evergreen. Its leaves are tough and leathery. When they are broken, they release a powerful fragrance. And even in winter, when many other plants lose their leaves, laurel remains green. For an ancient observer, it was easy to see something extraordinary in this behavior. And then came the laurel degree. There is a consequence of the symbolism of laurel that we still use today without even thinking about it. The word graduate. Over the centuries, the laurel wreath became associated not only with athletic or military victory, but also with wisdom, poetry, and culture. The poet crowned with laurel became a symbol of a person who had achieved a particular level of intellectual excellence. From this tradition came our idea of graduating. Thus, every time we see a laurel wreath during a graduation ceremony, we are looking at a symbol that has traveled through more than 2,000 years of history. From Greece to Rome, from the Roman world to the Middle Ages, from the Renaissance to modern universities. But what kind of plant is laurel really? At this point, we can finally look at the plant without the filter of myth. Its scientific name is Laurus nobilis. The plant belongs to the Lauraceae family and is an evergreen species typical of the Mediterranean region. Laurel can grow as a large shrub or as a small tree, and under favorable conditions it can reach considerable dimensions. The leaves are tough, glossy, aromatic, generally lance-shaped, with a characteristic slightly wavy margin. The plant is dioecious, meaning that male and female flowers grow on separate individuals. The flowers are small and yellowish, while the fruits are drupes that become dark, almost black, when they mature. And here we return to our kitchen. Laurel has survived to the present day not only as a symbol, but also as an aromatic plant. Its leaves are used to flavor and enrich countless dishes. An essential oil can be obtained from the leaves, while the fruits provide oily substances that have traditionally been used in cosmetics and craftsmanship. But perhaps the most fascinating thing is that, despite these modern uses being much simpler than the enormous symbolic heritage accumulated over the centuries, whenever we place a laurel leaf in a cooking pot, we are still using the same plant species that grew in landscapes inhabited by humans thousands of years ago. And perhaps that is exactly what makes laurel so fascinating. Laurel is not an exotic plant. Laurel is not a mysterious species hidden in some distant forest. Laurel is a plant we can still encounter today along Mediterranean coasts, in gardens, in the countryside, and even in a simple pot. And yet, behind those green leaves lies a story that stretches back at least 7,000 years of documented archaeological presence. Long before Apollo, long before Delphi, long before Rome, long before the crowns of victorious men, and long before anyone could speak of a university degree, laurel was already there, an evergreen plant that human beings would later transform into a symbol of knowledge, protection, victory, and glory, and perhaps it is no coincidence that its name has survived for so long. Because while many of the things that ancient people considered precious have ended up in museums, laurel is still alive. Laurel is still growing. Laurel is still fragrant. Laurel is still being used. And, in a sense, laurel is still carrying its ancient crown on the heads of human beings today. Did you enjoy this story of the laurel? Let me know in the comments what you think. And if you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing to Ancient Herbarium for more stories about the plants of the ancient world.